I know this is going to be way out there, but I have to get it off my chest and see if anyone has any theories. So my mum and I used to go on annual road trips, which included stopping for any points of interest along the highway, abandoned buildings, beautiful lookouts, tourist spots, etc. I remember one year when I was about 9, where we spent 11 hours straight on the road. At the time, my mum was beginning to documenting everything on her camera, so she decided to bring it along and got some awesome shots of the mountains. One of the neat things we found was a sort of rest stop and hiking area. We followed a path for maybe 20 meters when we come up to an old brick building. It was starting to crumble, and there was moss and mold covering its exterior. We were never sure what the building used to be, but we figured it must have been a random historic landmark if they kept it where it was, instead of actually demolishing it. We just thought it was really weird. We took a look inside and realised that whatever it used to contain was long gone, as the entire interior showed obvious signs of a bad fire. Everything was covered in soot. All that was left was an old fireplace and some scattered tiles. The main room had 2 brick support pillars, which hundreds of people had scratched their names into. I found a small chunk of rebar and carved ours into one of them as well. Afterwards, we left and carried on with our journey. That's where my memory of the day ends. Now recently, my nana gave me a couple of old boxes of my mum's stuff to go through. She ended up passing away when I was 16. One of the boxes had a couple dozen VHS movies, things like Escape from LA, Ren and Stimpy, The Goonies, all that good stuff. There were several unsealed tapes though, that were not labelled, which I immediately recognised as some of my mum's old home movies. I was thrilled, as now I can see my mum again in her glory days. It's extremely meaningful. After finding a VHS player at a pawn shop, because who still owns one in 2019, I started popping the tapes in to see what's on them. School recites, parties, typical stuff. The third one though, that's from 14 years ago. I got to the part where we had explored the hiking trails and got completely lost in the nostalgia. Except the video didn't match my memory of that day. Firstly, the path we took off the road was significantly longer than I remembered. It wasn't a mere 20-ish meters, but closer to a kilometer. Once inside, we looked around and found the pillars, and I wrote her names just as I remembered. Her name ended in an I, so I'm confused. I just kind of stabbed the pillar with the rebar, which makes a loud echoing sound. The second I did that in the video, I can hear my mum gasp and says, "What was that?" in a terrified voice. She started getting increasingly uneasy as I kept staring into the dark room while whining and saying I didn't feel good. Eventually, in a very shaky tone, she says we have to leave. Her camera kept scanning the room and the forest outside as though she's looking for something. Now the weirdest part? I don't ever remember feeling uneasy that day, but here I was watching both of us on the verge of a panic attack. I told her I was too scared to move and that I wanted to go. She helps me get up and we start back to the door when the camera sharply spun back to the room and focused on a whole lot of nothing. She starts mumbling, "No, no, no, I really don't like this," and made her way back outside. When she came out, I was nowhere to be seen. She yelled my name a couple of times and ran around to the back of the building, and she rounded it and came back out to the front. I was standing there smiling, since I was on the verge of tears and hyperventilating. She says, "Am I okay?" and I say, "Why?" The last minutes of the video shows us walking back to the road and her occasionally looking back at the building. I'm completely weirded out now. I legitimately do not remember any of this happening. The memory is exactly as I described it. I have no clue what to make of it. It deeply unsettles me. Why don't I remember the meltdown? Why were we so afraid of this place? Where did I disappear to? Why did I come back fine but crying? What was my mum saying? What did my mum sense in there? That's the part that kills me. The part I'll never get an answer to.
Over the years I've been on Reddit, I've shared a handful of stories to the sub. This is one that I've been saving for whatever reason, and I think I'm ready to share. This is probably my last post on Let's Not Meet, since it's not very often that something happens that's worthy of a Let's Not Meet post. I've shared a few of my experiences, and I think I saved the best for last. Everything mentioned here is 100% factual. Long read, but I believe it's worth it. I grew up in the south, tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice, but along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out, like a club or a cool bar, and the places that were close to this were pretty boring. I'm sure if you've lived in an actual rural area, you understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music, and would just take off driving around until the sun came up. It was a way for me to clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and also just getting the right amount of spooky in that too. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than what I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact that it was in the summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable chill night. So if I was to take a guess, it would probably be around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did and was completely worry free. I had my music blaring and I was in my zone. I decided to head down and park out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but is actually a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean some sort of dirt road that goes through the woods or anything like that. It's like a normal paved road, but there's really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to spread out further and further, to almost becoming no houses and just a road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I liked this drive at night was because of how creepy it was, and it looked like it was some sort of adventure or whatever. The park isn't open for camping or anything, it's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods, so obviously around 3 AM in the morning it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal little loop around the drive of the park. The night before it stormed very badly, so badly that I remember my parents had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty bad. Because of this, I came up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around the exit of the park that must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car obviously. It was pitch black everywhere, besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that was super dangerous and there was no way. At this spot of the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured it would make most sense to go back up in the grass besides me just a little, and then take a drive the way back I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going the wrong way since it was so late. So I started to back up off the road so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My tyres were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately took my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service. Super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty annoyed at me, but said they'd pay for a tow truck to come get me out. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans, and they would have been zero help in the situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of human civilization, so I realised I would be stuck there for at least an hour before someone would be able to get me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just tried to listen to music and be on my phone while in the car while I waited. Not really much else I could have done. After I kind of calmed down from the initial danger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything that was going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the most amount of deer I think I've ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been about 40 deer in this field, just walking around and eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in the direction, I would have easily been able to hit one. So if I was to guess, I'd say about 30 yards out. This didn't really help me with the creepy level going on. Looking out of the front of your car and seeing an AEI reflection staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall, but I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it and started to browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over a lot quicker than I was, because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck is on the way and is going to be about an hour and a half out from my location. Still to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, you've got to be kidding me. I understood that me and only me was the reason I was in the situation I was in, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just to make sure my doors were all locked, lay in my back seat and take a nap to pass the time. So that's what I did. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to that weird feeling of being watched. I'm not sure that anyone else has ever experienced anything like that before, because I don't know how common it is, but there was a 6% alarm going off in my head telling me that I needed to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in the surroundings I was in, is probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings and see nothing. I looked through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. A pocket knife. I was so scared. Even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling was terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always assumed they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided not to mention the feeling that I was having because I didn't want them to worry anymore, and I knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling I had, and had nothing to back it up. No update from the tow truck guy, so I assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes before I felt like such an idiot. They both have to wake up for work in a few hours, now have to spend a random $100+, and on top of that, they were worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation but worried. I told them I would make sure to tell them when the guy arrives and that I'm sorry. We hung up and I looked from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were completely perked up, staring in the same direction right in front of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field. Every single one of them was stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for something to happen, but nothing happened at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick and they didn't even budge or look my way. They were still completely glued to what was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far in the field. I knew they were looking into the woods, but I wasn't able to see what. I could hear my heartbeat. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds the field was empty. I was petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car was the safest thing to do, but it's the worst feeling in the world when you feel utterly like a sitting duck. My head was on swivel, I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point it was the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close, but I had no idea where he was. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me. and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an absolute eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see the lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see the tow truck guy. The lights of his truck felt like it was Jesus coming to save me. He gets up to me, and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what just happened to me, and that something's definitely nearby. He let me know he had a shotgun in the truck, and assured me that it was most likely a bear or a bobcat. He gave me the whole, they're more scared of you than you are of them. The tree was sort of small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way of his truck, and then he attached my car and pulled me out of the spot I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up. The whole time he was doing it, I had my eyes glued in that field waiting for something. He was completely done with everything in about 50 minutes and told me to follow his truck out onto the main road again. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and my head was on swivel, completely shook up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot that I was stuck in partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rearview mirror as a man came out from the tree line behind where my car was and walked into the middle of the road and watched us drive away. My heart stopped beating, legitimately. I lost my breath, my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in that moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like, or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time watching me as I was freaking out looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a long time, maybe even coming right up to my window and watching me sleeping. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words. All these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, he didn't move. Just watched us in the road. A million things went through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people on the road waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there, more than anything. The second that we finally got out of the park and was able to be on a 2-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver and did nothing below 70 miles per hour the entire way home. I flew through the stop signs and the stop lights. I didn't care. The only thing on my mind was making it home. I got home, ran inside very quickly and acknowledged my parents, said sorry and thank you, went to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep the rest of that night. I was searching for any sort of records or anything happening in that area, escaped convicts, similar stories, etc. I came to the conclusion that the man was some sort of squatter or homeless. I read many things online about how it's common for homeless in rural areas to build a shelter in the woods, which does make sense entirely on why they'd do that. But obviously the unknown is the scariest part of it all. What if he wasn't homeless? What if he was going to hurt me? Just, what if? There's so many possibilities that could have happened, but the outcome that did happen is the one that I'm most grateful for. I never told my parents the full story until many years after it happened, and I was already an adult and moved out. It freaked them out too when I told them. I never went back to that park. Even though I no longer live by there, I still have no desire to ever go back there. I don't think I could even go back in broad daylight with a ton of people around. I also made the decision to stop doing those late night cruises. I did it a few times after that with people, but even then I felt very uncomfortable and on edge.
It was Christmas time. My wife and I were staying at her childhood home where her mother now lived all alone. The house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs. If you're picturing freshly mowed lawns, American flags and empty sidewalks, you're picturing this correctly. It's a single-story home with an attached garage out front. The garage has 2 doorways, one that leads to the garden and backyard. This had an old dodgy door from their days with dear old Macs, Brit Macs, that were covered with a piece of nailed in wood. They had always made me slightly uncomfortable before, but I figured it had been that way for years, so what's the worst that can happen? The second door leads to the kitchen, hollow core. It could stop a mouse, but not much else. Definitely not something that wanted in. So we're asleep in my wife's childhood bedroom at the front of the house at 3 AM. I was in that deep, dark recess of sleep. You know, you're in the diving bell, and you're submerged hundreds of meters below the surface in black water, protected from the real world by miles of nothing. Then I hear it. The scream, "What are you doing?" and my mother-in-law's voice echoing down the hallway to me. Lost in a sea of sleep, it sounds like a jet engine roaring past my eardrum. I bolt up. What happened next happened in a couple of seconds. But about that scream, even though I was dead asleep, I heard it to be awoken with a sense of urgency. It wasn't an "oh, you scared me" type of scream. This is different. And I knew it. Not consciously, but my lizard brain. The piece we retrained from our primitive ancestors. Knowing something's wrong. I watched and read a fair amount of true crime, and this scream is horrifyingly similar to ones you hear on that. The one that says, "This can't be really happening to me, can it?" Honestly, in that second of the night, it sounded like someone was about to be murdered. You ever wonder if you're a fight or flight type of person? I always have, and I come to know something about myself, that I'm a fighter. I leapt out of bed and growled, yes growled, "I'm gonna kill you," and took off running. I tore open the bedroom door, running into the hallway. There, at the end, I saw my mother-in-law. She has a full nightgown on. Look of utter shock on her face. Standing still, we make eye contact as I continue towards her. Then she turned her head, looks directly into the kitchen. I hurry past her and around the corner into the kitchen. The hollowed door is obliterated. Shards everywhere. I look through the open frame and see the electric garage door is open. I push ahead. As I run into the garage, I hear it. The sound of someone hopping into a car just out of view. Just as I make it to the driveway, I see a car peeling out from the sidewalk adjacent to the house. But the adrenaline is still pumping, and who am I to say no to adrenaline? Like an idiot, I run barefoot after it. I give a good go, but I'm no Michael Johnson, and he can't even catch a speeding car. It soon vanishes down the street. I'm now stood here on my own. The police show up within 3 minutes, which, I have to say, makes me feel a lot more at ease. They take our statements. My mother-in-law said she heard a noise, hollow knocking on the door, and walked into the kitchen where she encountered a burglar, a small-framed woman. The police theorized she was working as part of a team. Her job was to squeeze through the dodgy door, kick in the hollow core, and open the electric garage for the others. According to the police, they very likely thought that nobody was in. Fortunately, my mother-in-law caught her off guard and screamed. But it feels good to know that everyone was safe, and to learn that I guess I've got a little fight in me. And for the record, we've bought the heaviest goddamn door that you'll ever see. I'd like to see a mouse try and get through that. That's funny.
Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads, or the path we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home till sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was only a piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink due to rainwater, and we wanted to seize the opportunity before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very closed path that leads directly into the densely wooded wilderness. As we came up through the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny, moving ball of a dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, the small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of the hill overlooking where we'd just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout in this hill, hoping that the plants in darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4 wheels and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out exactly what they were saying due to the distance we covered. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought is that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one out here the many times we've been there, and honestly we doubt this country even had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They yelled out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there, we can see you, come out!" We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now!" and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they were park rangers. We watched them split up, each going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point where he screamed from. I thought about calling out for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and run somewhere far enough away from these people to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we could through the woods, since their headlights gave away the location on these paths. We would hide again whenever we thought they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered by leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. We finally emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads, far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with on our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite ignoring him, and he was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the 2 streets we were near the corner of and explained that we needed to get picked up right away. He agreed and sped over to us while Justin and I waited hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted to the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt at being safely driven home and everything I'd just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with the night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would have gone by the time the officers made it out there anyway, and we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard the story. Some think we walked right up into a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started we couldn't see. Our minds both went to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer, so I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly though, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose.
This is the most terrifying moment of my life, and always will be. My family and a family friend's family were going on a hiking trip to the Appalachian mountain range. We rented cabins at a camping site and arranged for certain paths to take the following day. It would be a 4-day trip. The first 3 days went great. We saw wildlife, had a good time and spoke a lot. But on the 4th day, we were taking a trail that was more secluded and overgrown than the rest. We were walking for about 30 minutes when I was hit with this overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. The feeling just stayed there no matter what I did. And then, everyone else on the hike denies this, but I hear singing in a language that I've never heard before. It's like the singing described in the myth of the sirens, sweet yet enchanting, yet the music invoked a feeling of fear down to my bones. Everyone else seems completely oblivious to it. I'm telling my dad that something was wrong, but he just told me I was probably tired and that we're going to stop soon. So about 5 minutes later, the singing just gets louder. My heart's racing. We had to stop to rest and eat. I wish with all my heart that we hadn't stopped. About 2 minutes into our little rest, the singing's getting progressively louder. My nerves have not settled. Then, everything goes silent. Everyone in our group, which is about 12 people, suddenly turns to our left. A figure that's very tall in a black coat was barely visible between the trees. It's a woman, much taller than people are supposed to be, with pure white hair flowing out of her hood. Her head is down, but her face is still visible. All I can make out is that her skin's very pale, like old paper. As we watch, she just stalks closer to our group, finally stopping dead at the edge of the tree line. And she looks up, and I swear to God, as long as I live and breathe, I can't forget her face. Her eyes are white. She has a pointed nose and pale lips. She stares at us for a moment and smiles. That's horrifying. She has no teeth. She then begins to try and talk to us in this high-pitched tone, but I don't know what she's saying. And in a blink, she's gone. Everyone's silent. This is my first time telling the experience, and I hate it. I just need to try and get it off my chest.
I was a kid. My parents sent me to Christian camp every year during the summer. Despite the Christian atmosphere, the campgrounds were wrought with ghost stories and rumours, most of them made up. The campgrounds had some history, and the founders of the camp had their own cabin, which was repurposed as a campus cabin. It was more of a shed, but rumour was it was haunted. With side paths and several clearings hidden away in the forest parts, people would sneak away and do unorthodox things. Satanic rituals were rumoured to take place, but probably weren't true. The way the camp was set up, about half the cabins were lightly wooded areas closer to the entrance of the camp. The other half, and the lodge bordered a well-kept field, with taller and unruly grass stretching further off to meet the forest on the other side of the field. When I was about 6, I was assigned to a cabin by the field. It was an A-frame cabin, and was swelteringly hot. The camp being nestled in the mountain could, oddly enough, afford complex kitchenware, but skimped on comfort for the campers. Most of the nights, I slept on the top of my sleeping bag as opposed to inside it. The bathrooms were separate from the cabin, and being 6 and very much afraid of the dark, especially in a dark, unfamiliar, lightless place, I often found myself terrified to sleep for fear of wetting the bed. Our counsellor Josh was really relaxed too. Looking back, he was probably the most chill counsellor I ever had. He was in the Army Reserve, and let us get away with a lot of things that never really flew after that year. The camp was pretty strict about rules. Lights out by 9, no venturing out of your cabin unless you use the bathroom. You couldn't even buy more than 1 soda from the commissary. Josh taught us that some rules are better left broken. At least that way you experience more out of life. As the weeks progressed, I found myself becoming more courageous. It was to the point where I was brave enough to venture a few feet away from my cabin at night to pee. On our last night, Josh proposed we spent the night in the field. We would pretend to go to bed at lights out. The staff would walk around with headlights and make sure everyone was in their beds, and then sneak out when we no longer saw the headlamps of wandering staff. We snuck out a little early and were startled by a straggler staffer. Josh hissed at us to get down on the ground near the bushes to blend in with the darkness. The staffer didn't seem to notice us in their peripheral, but he seemed frantic by the way he was running towards the staff lodge. I noticed his panicked and clumsy footfalls as he ran to the cabin for the night, thinking, amused at how a grown man could be afraid of the dark too. We settled down by the tall grass, and when my eyes adjusted to the darkness, the stars above shone down on us, and it was as if I was looking into the cosmos itself. Josh was making some speech about how the stars were made by God, but I just ignored it and gazed up, comforted by the vague mischief we caused and the camaraderie I now shared with my cabin mates. Josh said he would wake us before the morning bell so we wouldn't get in trouble. I don't know when I fell asleep. Josh was talking all about creation, and suddenly, deafening silence only interrupted by the gentle sway of the tall grass in the breeze. I don't know what would have woken me up, but the sight of the stars and the gentle sound of the grass was luring me back to sleep. Before I could fall back asleep, I heard it. A gentle crunch in the tall grass. I was panicked, but when I didn't hear the sound of the second time, I calmed myself down, telling myself it was just a rabbit. A second crunch, this time a little heavier. My eyes flew open, and I slowly turned on my side to face my other cabin mates to see if they'd woken too. If there happened to be a mountain lion, I didn't want to become a target by making any sudden movements. The crunching sound became more frequent, and sounded as if it was coming closer, as if someone or something was at first trying to be sneaky, but gave up halfway. I was on my side, face to face with one of my cabin mates named Cody, and my back to the long grass. Behind me, the crunching got closer and louder. I was tearing up in unbridled fear. If I got up, it might go away, but on the off chance it didn't, would it attack me? Would this be my last night alive? As my thoughts raced and the footsteps got closer, I felt as if I was being watched by a sinister presence. Just as I was about to get up and bolt, Cody stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered and opened wide in fear as he looked past me and to whatever the thing was behind me. Laboured heavy breathing came through the grass behind me. Cody was considering running, I could tell. I softly shook my head, my eyes probably betraying my own fear. He gulped, and another one of our cabin mates let out a soft groan in his sleep. I could feel the eyes of whatever was behind me lift its whole boring gaze off me for a moment and my other cabin mate. Shivering uncontrollably, I felt like I was going to witness something gruesome. The thing behind me let out a soft guttural growl, sounding oddly human, but yeah, bestial. I could sense it tense up as if to attack. Before I could, however, some coyotes yipped off in the distance, drawing the beast's attention away from us. The footfall sounded as if it was retreating to the forest, and Cody's eyes seemed a little relaxed. We waited what felt like hours before Cody breathed to me, "Do you think it's gone?" I nodded, but he could see that I wasn't even convinced myself. We both stayed awake all night and hardly spoke a word at breakfast. Before we left for the year, I asked Cody what he saw, and he explained that he saw the body of an excessively skinny man. His hands weren't his own, rather ended like dog paws with long, retractable claws. He didn't have a human head, or if he did, it was hidden by what appeared to be the head of a stag. The only other person Cody told about the creature was Josh, but Josh thought he was just spreading another rumour and played it off. I never saw Cody back at camp, and we lost contact. Josh deployed in Iraq, and unfortunately lost his life in 2001. There's a flagpole erected in honour of Josh in the middle of the field where we slept. I've been known to have some pretty awful nightmares, and I always just thought that's exactly what it was, until I got more interested in cryptids. The world is a large and scary place, and while the campgrounds were especially gorgeous, I don't think I'll ever return if it was a skinwalker like I think it is. Since I left, there's been disappearances here and there throughout the years, and I wonder if anyone would ever believe me.
This happened about a year ago, but still haunts me to this day. Back when I'm in middle school, I lived next door to a small neighbourhood. All I had to do was hop the fence and I'd be in the neighbourhood where all my friends are, where we are all between the ages of 12 and 13, and there were 5 of us. One of the houses where we were always had a backyard on the edge of the woods. We had created trails throughout it, completed with bridges over the creek that led to a reservoir of sorts where all the rainwater went, as well as the water that drained from the sewers. I say sewers, but it's a runoff from the street, and we use the tunnels under the road during intense games of manhunt. Anyway, we called that place the wall. The wall backed up quite literally to a house in the neighbourhood, and the next street over, we could clearly see houses through the trees in any direction we looked, so it's not like we're even far. Besides the trail we took, there was a main exit along the fence at the house aforementioned that led straight into the heart of the neighbourhood. Now, the wall was right by the street over. On our side, where the wall sat, there were 3 houses. One of them houses lived a well-known police officer whose kids were actually friends with us. The opposite side had a massive farmland to the left and a heavily wooded area to the right, complete with its own empty, boarded up, creepy house that couldn't be seen from the road unless it's winter. No one had ever lived there, or at least in the last 3 years that we knew of. So like I said, and I'm trying to paint the picture here so you can understand, we were very, very close to the other homes, which makes this story an odd one. One of my friends and I, just the 2 of us, decided to go to the wall, taking the familiar trails through the woods, and we made it to the wall. Weeks prior to this, the group of us had been trying to make a bridge so we can continue our work. Between picking up branches and heaving stones, we noticed that something's coming from the woods across the street. It's a man. This man was dressed head to toe in camouflage, typical hunting gear that I've seen before. The weirdest thing was he had a shotgun in his hands, in a residential area. Luckily, we noticed him before he notices us, and I'm so glad we did. When he notices us, his eyes locked on both of us and his pace begins to quicken, and he made a beeline to us. He never said a word or even lowered his weapon. It was just in his hands, ready at any given moment. We snap out of it, take the exit, sprinting into the heart of the neighbourhood, running straight to my friend's house to tell someone. We tell her dad, and he immediately goes to check it out, but finds no one, not a trace. I don't know where or who that man was, but her dad wasted no time, going there in seconds. The wooded area where the man came from was not large, at least not large enough to ever consider hunting on, and it was definitely not hunting land. It's an extremely residential area with an elementary school no less than 3 minutes away. I never understood why the man was there, especially since there's a cop who lives there. All I know is that he was up to no good, and he probably did something terrible and may have been escaping. It's a terrifying accident that we encountered him.
I am a 20-year-old man from Mexico. For some background, my family and I live in a certain state in Mexico. It's been known for drug violence, but my family never was really affected by it. So I unwisely thought that my family was immune to all that stuff. This incident that I'm sharing in this story totally awoke me from that fantasy. For some more information for the readers, I live in a multi-generation household with 3 parents, 3 siblings, my paternal grandfather, 2 paternal aunts, along with both of their husbands, 1 paternal uncle and his wife, 1 maternal aunt, she has a boyfriend that doesn't live with us, 1 maternal uncle, he's single, and 5 cousins. It's a pretty crowded house, but I manage, barely at times. Around 9 years ago, during spring break, some American friends that were also business partners came to visit my family. The American family composed of a father and his girlfriend, along with their 2 children. The kids' names were Mary, age 19, and Jarifo, who was my age at the time. I was fairly good friends with Jarifo, while Mary usually hung out with my older cousins. Our families decided to go on a camping trip out in the desert, but both our families were quite fond of extreme adventuring, so we wanted to find some remote location in the desert. The less people in the location, the more thrilling our camping would be in our minds. So me, my dad, my older brother, 2 cousins, Jarifo's father, Mary, and a few of my aunts and uncles set off camping. Once we found a wonderful camping spot, we set up our stuff. Me and Jarifo started getting bored sitting around the campfire, so without telling the adults, we decided to go on a little hike. A very stupid mistake, but we were nothing more than young 11-year-old kids. We just wanted to have an adventure on our own, and we thought we were invincible. Man, that didn't end well at all. While me and Jarifo were hiking out, we managed to get lost, not a surprise to anyone at all. As we were walking, we had totally lost track of where we were. We wandered helplessly around the desert, screaming as loud as we could, hoping that our families or some other campers would hear us. This kept us for around 3 hours, before we almost lost all hope of rescue. It was starting to get extremely dark and very cold. We suddenly came across some sort of human activity several yards away. Jarifo and I managed to pick out around 6 or 7 trucks. When we got closer, we could easily see around 24 men hanging around. From what we could tell, they were composed of a bunch of Latino and white guys. All the white guys had racist tattoos all over their bodies. One especially creepy dude had a skull tattoo on his face, while obviously other stuff was tattooed on the head of the other guy. The Latino men were similarly heavily tattooed, but I can't remember what they looked like now. The men were all armed with assault rifles. Me and Jarifo exchanged confused glances. The lighting was quite dark, but I could easily see that the Hispanic guys were handing over white bags to the white men. Obviously this was some sort of drug deal between the Mexican cartel and some American gang. I have heard several stories of such things happening, but I never imagined seeing something like that in person. Jarifo whispers to me that we need to get out of there before they saw us. We tried to scurry out as fast as quietly possible. This totally failed, as one of the Mexican gunmen spotted us and pointed us out to his buddies. The American and Mexican drug dealers started to shoot at us. Bullets were flying and crashing all around us. Our adrenaline kicked in and then we ran out the wind. I felt one bullet graze my side, but I kept running. Jarifo was shot in the stomach and he fell to the ground clutching his wound. He let out the most blood-curdling scream imaginable, the scream that still haunts me to this day. I knew that if I went to his aid, I would have been killed too, so I was forced to leave him behind. When I glanced back, a Mexican drug dealer dressed up as a trashy cowboy walked up to Jarifo. He then finished him off. No time for tears, I kept running. I prayed to every god that I could think of to save me. I was totally convinced that I was going to die that night, and my family would never find me. Slowly scumbling to fatigue, I glanced towards my right, and I spot a river 10 feet away. Knowing that this was my best chance of escaping my pursuers, despite the risk of drowning, I jumped into the river. I was never a stellar swimmer, but with the danger I was in, I suddenly became an Olympic swimmer that would have made Michael Phelps proud. The drug dealers continued to fire at me, but I eventually swam far enough away they gave up. I swam for another hour before I went back into dry land. Afterwards, I found a cave to settle into for the rest of the night. 3 hours later, I woke up to a flashlight in my face. For a second, I thought the drug dealers had found me again, but I was relieved to find out that it was simply just a rescue party sent to me by Jarifo's family. I was airlifted to hospital and treated for my wounds. After my recovery, I explained what happened to my and Jarifo's families. A sympathetic police officer explained to us that we probably witnessed a drug deal between the Juarez cartel and the Aryan Brotherhood. He then advised us to leave before the cartel tried any further attacks on us. Jarifo's family called off the vacation and went home the next day. Not wanting further retaliation from the cartels, my own family moved to the Osakata state. So far so good, we've never had any trouble from the cartels again. Jarifo's body was never found. I have no idea what happened to the dealers that attacked us that night, but I wish them the worst. I still have no contact with Jarifo's family. To this day, I still get nightmares about the whole incident. It seems like this will be a chip on my shoulder for a long time.
This weekend, I went hiking with my boyfriend and a few of his friends. The 5 of us were heading up to a not so popular mountain trail that's about 10 minutes long up on a small lake. We saw 2 couples on their way down, but no one passed us up on the way. The trail isn't super easy and wildlife is pretty common. We saw a moose about 3 miles in, so we're all on guard for more mooses or a mountain lion or anything that can cause a problem. After the moose, we ran into a small patch of snow that's maybe 100 feet along the trail. Past the snow, we walk another 20 to 30 yards and find a deer's ribcage and spine. We gather around it, not saying much, and one of the guys turns it over with a stick. It's picked clean. After we stand up, an older guy is standing like 10 feet away from us. Not sure if one of us heard him or saw him walk up. It's like he just appeared. And after we make eye contact, he just turns over, jumps over the little creek, cutting through 18 inches of snow, running up the side of the mountain, disappearing.
People like to warn you about the dangers of nature when you go camping, but that's not what you should be afraid of. No, not exactly. I went camping with my girlfriend in a place called Nightfall Forest. As you might expect from the name, it was dark and a foreboding place, with areas where the trees grew so thick that very little sunlight could get through their overgrown branches. Lacey, my girlfriend, and a biologist in training, went to study the ecosystem of a particular area of the forest, known for its unique fungi and bacteria. It was a lot of science work to me, but a break from work sounded great, so I decided to tag along. She moved out, set up her instruments, as I set up camp not too far from the river. It was cool, a gentle breeze blowing over the camp as I hammered the last nails into the soil below. I had to admit it was nice. Nobody screaming at me about deadlines, no phones ringing every few minutes to complain about a product that I had no part in making, no cars honking at traffic or neighbours yelling loudly over the noise of their TVs. Nothing but the sound of the wind breaking through the trees, the trickle of water over rocks, and a few birds that I couldn't quite pinpoint in the dense foliage above. "What are you smiling at?" Lacey walked over and sat down beside me on a half-rotten log. It creaked under our combined weight. I was smiling. You were? Just enjoy the quietness and solitude, I guess. It's really nice out here, isn't it? She grabbed my hand and kissed the knuckles. Don't worry, you can get back to your keyboard tapping and smog-infested city in just a few short days. That night, we cooked a fish Lacey caught over the fire she built, and it struck me how little I knew of surviving in the wilderness. I was a city boy, born and bred. This was foreign land to me. We made love for the first time under the stars, what little of them shone through the trees above us, and then retired to the tent. I was beat. It was around 2 AM when a sound outside woke me. Dry leaves crackled and branches snapped. I looked over and Lacey was gone, and a brief moment I panicked. Something took her. A wild animal came in and was dragging her away right this second. A crazy old hermit was living in the woods, and he abducted her as penance for trespassing on his land. Endless scenarios ran through my head as a shadow appeared in front of the tent. This is it, I thought. This is where the old crazy hermit comes and murders me and rips out my liver for tomorrow's breakfast. The zipper began to rise slowly. Each metal tooth it ran over echoed through the tent, through my soul. Inch by inch it rose, getting stuck on something halfway. It was too dark to see. I fumbled around for something, anything I could to defend myself. All I could find was my pillow. All the tools were outside. God, I was an idiot. The zipper broke free of its snag, and I rose again, edging closer and closer to my impending doom. I grabbed my pillow and swallowed. At the very least, I could confuse the intruder and escape into the forest. If it was too dark for me to see, that meant it was too dark for them as well. I braced myself. 3, 2, 1. Jesus, you scared me. It was just Lacey. That's my line. What the hell are you doing? I had to pee. Did you have to pull the zip of the tent like a serial killer? I didn't want to wake you. Too late. I'm awake. Fuck me. I thought I was about to lose my liver. Your liver, what? Lacey got into her sleeping bag and fluffed up her pillow. Never mind. Well, now that I'm awake, I'm gonna go pee too. Have fun, she said. I made my way out into the darkness. Crickets chirps, and the trickle of water over rocks continued, unabated. It was both unnerving and soothing at the same time. I finished my business, and as I turned to return to the tent, I froze. I wasn't alone. This wasn't Lacey trying to sneak her way back into the tent without waking me. There was someone standing in the trees, just a few meters away. It was too dark to see anything but a vague outline, but there was no mistaking it. There was a person right there. I could pick up a rock and hit them with it. Did they see me? I couldn't tell which direction the person was facing. They were just standing there, like a statue. I stood still, waiting to see if the figure could make a move. I was sure I could hear the beating of my heart in my chest. Why wasn't it moving? There was a cry in the distance. We both turned towards the sound, and then the figure turned to look at me, his eyes glinting in the darkness before it took off running. I scrambled for the tent and yanked the zipper down as hard as I could, forcing it to get stuck several times. "What are you doing?" Lacey asked, rubbing her eyes. I put a shaky finger to my lips and crawled into my sleeping bag. We waited, listening. There was another cry, fainter this time, and then silence. The thing was gone. "There was something out there," I whispered, unable to hide the fear in my voice. Lacey sat up. "What do you mean? Someone's out there? Who?" I shook my head. There was a cry, a scream, something, and they took off. I left out the part about the eyes. No need to worry her or make her think I was insane. I was a city boy. She would put it down to the unfamiliarity of the woods and not take me seriously. Camping virgin or not, the thing I saw, it wasn't human. The morning came without a wink of sleep, and Lacey went off to check her instruments. "Do you want some breakfast?" I called out. "I'll eat later," she said. The forest felt cold, unwelcoming almost, like the eyes were watching me from every corner. I stood up, thinking to join Lacey as she did her rounds, but then it dawned on me that I had no idea where she was. I was setting up camp when she put her stuff out. I was alone. I made my way over to the trees, where I saw the figure the night before. There were footprints in the mud, leading in the same direction where the figure ran off. I didn't imagine it. I followed them for a few meters before they disappeared. It wasn't that the mud ended, the footprints just stopped. I needed to think of an excuse before Lacey got back, so we could get the hell out of here. She could call me a chicken all she wanted, but at least I'd been a live chicken. But as the morning went on, there was no sign of her. I tried my hand at fishing, but all it brought was frustration and even more time to think. I tried to set up booby traps around the camp, but I was no Boy Scout. I didn't know the first thing about setting up a snare. Mud squelched under my feet and twigs snapped. How on earth did someone get so close to our camp without us hearing them? I couldn't make 2 steps without alerting half the forest. Several hours passed and no sign of Lacey. I bit my nails and wore a path in the grass beside our tent. Our phones were off and unable to receive reception out here, regardless. I knew my way back to the car, but that was it. If I went looking for Lacey, chances are I'd get myself lost and I'd be in even more trouble. But then a scream drew me from my thoughts. "Lacey!" I took off running. Getting lost didn't matter if Lacey ended up dead or injured instead. I pushed my way through the trees and branches, scraping my arms and face. There was another scream to my left. I turned, sliding in the mud before picking up speed again. The thing I saw outside the tent, it had her. It was all I could think. I slipped and fell several times, covering myself in mud, and then I heard a third scream, this time to my right. It was playing with me. I fell to my knees exhausted. I had no idea where I was, no idea how to get back, no idea where Lacey was or even if she was okay. It lured me out here, away from the camp, and now I could do as it pleased with Lacey. It was all I could think of, rational or otherwise. Lacey. I had to save Lacey. I stood up and ran in the direction I came from. At least the direction I thought I came from. Panic was settling in, and the forest looked the same no matter how far I ran. I could have been running in circles for all I knew. Maybe I was. My heart jumped in my throat. Footprints. I found footprints. If I followed them back, I could reach the campsite. I didn't miss a beat as I leapt over rocks and branches. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't scared. Then something moved in front of me, and I was on my back in the mud. Lacey! She looked at me confused. What are you doing? I extracted myself from the muck and grabbed her by the shoulders. That's my line. Are you okay? I heard screams. Her brow furrowed. I didn't hear anything. Are you okay? My head pounded, my chest ached, my brain was clouded with fear and confusion. You didn't hear those screams just before? They were loud enough I could hear them from the camp. I thought it was you. At that she smiled. Oh, you're so sweet. But I was just checking on my instruments. I didn't hear anything at all. Really? She nodded. You're probably just tired. You didn't get much sleep after all. Maybe. A sleepless night wasn't new to me, but it didn't explain why I heard something screaming when she didn't. Come on, let's go back to camp. I'll whip up a lunch special of canned beans and filtered river water. I attempted a smile that never quite reached my lips and followed her back. The forest was too quiet. My nerves refused to settle down. We ate lunch in silence. My muddy clothes hung by the tent, and all I could think was that I didn't want to be out here any longer. Camping wasn't for me. We were supposed to stay a few more days, but I wasn't sure if I could make it through the next night. Lacey. Yeah, she asked, stuffing her face with beans like she'd never eaten a meal before in her life. I want to get out of here. You want to go for a walk or something? No, out of here entirely. I want to go home. She snickered. Now you're just being silly. We just got here and I haven't finished my recordings. I felt bad, but I couldn't do it. Please. She looked at me. You serious? Yeah, I am. She considered it and then sighed. Is this about the screams? I shook my head. It's not just that. I know you didn't see them, but I saw someone last night. Right here, by the trees. I don't like this place. It's dangerous. Who's to say that tonight they won't return and murder us for real? I know you just wanted to do some research, but that research isn't going to be any good if we're both dead. I don't like this place, and I just don't. I just want to go home, please. She finished her plate of beans and set it down to the log beside her. You owe me big time. I couldn't help hide the smile on my face. Anything at all, you name it. Yeah, well, first I have to go get all my gear, I suppose. One day's worth of results is better than nothing. And you, sir, you get to break down the tent and put everything away. No problem, it'll be done before you know it. My spirits lifted. No doubt she'd give me shit the entire way home, but I could deal with that. Because we'd be alive and we'd be safe. That was all that mattered. I gathered our gear up in record time and was waiting when Lacey returned. We loaded up, I said an internal F you, and hope I never see you again, to the forest, and we went on our way. Did you manage to get anything from your tests? I tried to make conversation as we walked so I wouldn't have to think about how creepy the forest was. The sun was setting and it would be dark soon. I hated winter. Early nights suck. No, not very much, nah. But it's fine, I can come out here and get some by myself. I scratched my nose and avoided looking at her. This was the right thing to do. I wasn't imagining things, I just wasn't. I'm sorry, I know you're looking forward to this trip. Look, if you're gonna mope the whole way home, just stop right now. I agreed to go back with you, didn't I? She did, yeah. Now stop fussing over it. Sorry. We walked in silence. The closer we got to the car, the more forest sprang to life. Birds sang, insects chirped, and the various creatures scuttled around the forest floor. The sound of several large animals stomping through the brush caught my attention, but I couldn't find them. As long as we didn't get in their way, we'd be fine. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, but the car was in sight, just a few more meters, and we'd— Josh! Lacey, a few steps ahead of me, stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to look at me in the gloom of dusk, her expression unreadable. Lacey's voice called out my name. Only Lacey, standing in front of me, wasn't the name who called it. It came from the trees to our right. What the hell? We need to go now, Lacey said. She didn't wait for an answer and picked up the pace towards the car. Josh, wait! Something came running out of the trees. It was Lacey. What the hell? Lacey, the original Lacey, turned around. There were two of them looking right at me. What the hell is going on? Lacey, the other Lacey, was covered in mud. I took a step back as she ran towards me. Josh, it's me! My eyes flickered back and forth between the two of them, and my back pressed into a tree. I went out to pee last night and something odd grabbed me. This thing isn't me. I didn't know what to believe. They were a mirror image of each other. I don't know what that thing is, but I can tell you that when I went out to pee last night, I most certainly wasn't grabbed. The non-messy Lacey looked at me, her eyes wide. And yeah, I agree, we really should get out of here now. The messy Lacey turned and jumped before I could say a word. The two Laceys fell in the mud, scratching and punching and kicking. I ran over, grabbed the nearest one and pulled her off. There was a growl deep in the forest. I swallowed. That wasn't a deer. There was no time for this. It was getting darker and colder by the second. I turned to Lacey on my right. "What did you get me for my 5th birthday?" "A red Matchbox car," she said without hesitation. I turned to Lacey on my left, pushing herself up out of the mud. "What did I want but not get for my birthday last year?" "A rainbow cake with buttercream frosting," she said, flicking the mud off the front of her pants. Both were correct. The red Matchbox car was a pride of my childhood, and it sat on my dresser at home. Only Lacey knew about the cake I wanted last year, but due to a mistake at the bakery, never got it. This was insane. I don't know what the fuck's going on here, but I can't be the only one who heard that growl just now. Lacey, both Laceys look at me. A second later it was on us. A featureless man, like something moulded out of clay, ran for Lacey. Its eye glinted in the darkness, and it barreled into her full speed, sending them both tumbling to the ground. A scream barely had time to escape my lips before it was all over. The clay man ripped out her throat. Lacey, the other one beside me, screamed. The yellow eyes turned towards her, and then looked at me. A mistake was made. There weren't supposed to be two Laceys. Something fucked up the process. The clay man grabbed my wrist and began to charge before me. It grew taller, matching my height. The watch on my arm began to form on his. The bare chest morphed into my shirt and jacket. Its blank face became mine. Lacey screamed again. I pulled the creature away from her and we fell, hitting the ground hard. Mud clouded my vision. Mud, so much mud. It was on everything, working its way into every crevice in my body. I extracted my limbs and swung for the thing with my face. It grunted and grabbed my hair, pulling me back down. It pinned me to the ground, and as it adjusted to bear its full weight down on me, I lifted my knee. I kicked with all my might, sending the other me tumbling to the ground. I grabbed Lacey's hand and ran blindly for the car. "Get back here," the man yelled in my voice. I ran as fast as I could, not turning back. "Hey, don't leave me here!" I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. The car was just ahead. Lacey was dead. Was this my Lacey? There was no time to think about it. I pressed a button on my keys, relief flooding through me as I heard the familiar beep signifying the car was unlocked. I ran for the driver's side, while Lacey ran for the other. Our things could be replaced, but not our lives. I saw myself running for the car as I put the key in the ignition. Even more frightening than seeing the other Lacey in front of me was seeing myself. It was a perfect copy. It even ran with heavy feet like I did. The engine brought to life as the no longer clay version of myself jumped up onto the car. Lacey had her head in her hands, crying. I threw the car into reverse and watched as it went flying into the parking lot. I sped off, visions of myself running like a crazed Terminator with a limp in the rearview mirror burning into my mind. Lacey said nothing as we drove the empty roads home. We both watched her, or at least the other version of her, die before our very eyes. But which Lacey was it? Did she even know herself? And now there was another version of me running around somewhere out there too. Both Laceys truly believe they were the original. It keeps me up at night sometimes wondering. I've never seen anything to doubt that the Lacey sleeping beside me isn't the one that I met when we were 17-year-olds and stupid kids with too much time on our hands. But I could see it in her eyes when they argued. They both believe they were the one and only true Lacey. They both have the same memories, the same features, the same scars, the same feelings and emotions. Somewhere out there is another version of me. Did he return to the woods, lost and confused, or is he figuring out his next move? Waiting for the right moment to get rid of the imposter inhabiting his house, sleeping in his bed and making love to his girlfriend. Sometimes I wonder though, in the quiet of the night when the world is asleep, am I really me? If we have the same memories and we both believe ourselves to be the one and only true version, how do I know that I'm the original? Even if he does come and kill me and take my place, how will I ever know? I won't, and that's the thing that worries me the most.